So I want to start today with, well, with a paradox, really. If you hold a piece of Preseli Bluestone, you're not holding something that looks, particularly special. It's dark, it's heavy, it's incredibly dense, it feels, I don't know, utilitarian. And for thousands of years, that's exactly what it was. It was sort of the Stone Age equivalent of industrial steel. Used to chop, to break, to build.
It's a material defined by its brute strength.
Right. But then you open the texts we're looking at today, especially the ones on the eternal echo of Preseli Bluestone, and the language just, it completely flips. All of a sudden, this weapon-grade rock is being described with words like compassion, heart, and universal song. It's a really jarring contrast. You have a rock hard enough to build Stonehenge, but it's given this personality that's softer than a nursery rhyme.
And that tension, that space between the physical reality and the metaphysical reputation, that's really the core of what we're getting into today. Usually, when we talk about spiritual stones, we're thinking quartz or amethyst, things that look light, ethereal. Preseli Bluestone is a different beast entirely. It's grounded, it's geologically aggressive.
And that's what we're unpacking. We aren't just reading the legends. We're trying to figure out why this specific stone became the vessel for these very specific ideas. We're going to look at the hard science, why it's heavier and harder than granite, and how that, that physical permanence might have actually created the legends of time travel and healing that surround it.
It's the story of how a tool became a talisman.
So let's get into the geology first, because I think a lot of people hear bluestone and they just assume it's, a color. But Preseli dolerite is a very specific thing.
Oh, it is. And to really get why this stone matters, you have to understand what it's made of. If you look at it under a microscope, you're seeing an igneous rock chemically altered over millions of years. But the secret sauce, let's say, according to the text, is this combination of Plagioclase Feldspar and Augite.
Augite. That's a pyroxene mineral, right?
Correct. And that matters because of the structure. In a lot of rocks, the crystals are just kind of stuck together. In dolerite, especially this kind, the crystals are often interlocking. It creates a matrix that is just incredibly resistant to crushing.
Which explains the claim in our notes that it's notably harder than granite.
It's significantly tougher. I mean, granite is hard, but it can be brittle. Preseli Bluestone has a density and a toughness that made it kind of the titanium of the Neolithic era.
This is what I found so fascinating about the historical context. We always talk about Stonehenge, and we'll get there. But the source mentions that tools made from Preseli Bluestone, specifically axe heads, have been found all over the British Isles.
That changes the narrative, doesn't it?
Completely. It suggests that long before anyone thought to drag these stones to Salisbury Plain to build a monument, this rock was already famous. It was a trade commodity.
And think about the logistics of that. In a world with no real roads, no wheels as we know them, people were moving these heavy, dense stones hundreds of miles. Why? Because they didn't flake or shatter like flint. If you had a Preseli axe, you had the best technology available. You had a tool that lasted.
So at first, the value was purely functional. It was the forever tool.
But I'd argue that's exactly where the spiritual reputation begins. If you have an object that doesn't break, that outlasts the person holding it, and it comes from this one specific mysterious range of hills in Wales, it starts to feel eternal. It starts to feel like it has a life of its own.
Which leads us, inevitably, to the big construction project. We all know Stonehenge. We know the massive sarsen stones, the big arches. But the source material is very specific. We are talking about the bluestones, the inner circle.
The heart of the monument. And this is a detail that often gets glossed over. The builders didn't just use the local rock for the center. They went 150 miles to the Preseli Hills to get this specific dolerite.
And considering the density we just talked about, the fact that it's heavier and harder than granite, that effort is just, it's mind-boggling. It's almost irrational, unless the stone meant something profound to them.
Exactly. You don't drag 4-ton stones across a prehistoric landscape just because they look nice. And actually, they don't even look that blue unless they're wet or freshly cut. Most of the time, they just look like dark gray rocks. So the value wasn't aesthetic, it was intrinsic.
The source implies that the why has something to do with the stone's voice, or its acoustic properties.
There is a theory, supported by the density of the feldspar and augite, that these are lithophones.
Lithophones.
Rocks that ring.
Like a bell.
Precisely. If you strike them, they resonate. So, try to imagine the Neolithic perspective. You have a rock that is unbreakable, heavy as anything, and when you hit it, it sings.
Yeah.
It's not a huge leap to start thinking it has a voice or a spirit inside it.
Which is the perfect bridge to the metaphysical part of the text. We move from the ringing rock to what the source calls the stone of universal unity.
It's a real pivot from physical durability to spiritual connection.
Okay, but I have to pause here because there's an irony I can't ignore. We just established this stone was famous for making axes, weapons, and yet the text describes its energy as compassion, love, and peace. So, how do you reconcile the stone of universal unity with a stone used to bash things?
That is the fascinating contradiction, isn't it? But think about what a tool does. An axe clears a forest to build a home. It shapes wood to build a boat. It's a tool of creation just as much as destruction. And in the context of our source material, unity isn't just about everyone holding hands. It's about integration, bringing things together. The source defines the stone's voice as something that speaks to the inner being. It resonates. Just like the stone physically rings when struck, the claim is that it causes the human spirit to sort of ring in sympathy.
Let's dig into that voice concept because the text gets very specific and honestly a little controversial about who gets to hear it.
You're referring to the pure-hearted child quote.
Yeah, I'll read it directly. The pure-hearted child shall hear my voice, my song, through to the physical recognized manner.
But then it immediately follows that with, there shall be very few to hold such a gift.
It does create a sense of exclusivity.
It really does. It sounds like gatekeeping.
Sorry, unless you're one of the chosen few, this is just a rock.
It feels at odds with the whole idea of universal unity.
I read that a little differently. I don't think it's about moral gatekeeping. I think it's more of a commentary on noise.
Meaning what? The text mentions that this group will grow gently as unity takes form. It suggests the voice is always there, the frequency is constant, but most of us are too cluttered to hear it. The pure-hearted child archetype, it usually represents a state of mind that isn't cynical, isn't distracted, isn't buried in ego.
So it's not that the stone is withholding the signal, it's that our receivers are kind of broken.
Exactly. The exclusivity isn't imposed by the stone, it's a symptom of the human condition. We are rarely quiet enough to hear something so subtle.
The text does offer a bit of a loophole, though. It says you only need a little faith to recognize the healing touch. So you don't need to be a saint, you just need to be open.
And that openness is the prerequisite for the healing properties, the source lists. And these aren't, physical things like it cures a headache. They are deeply existential issues.
The list is surprisingly heavy. Loneliness, lost souls, uncertainty.
Look at the common thread there. Loneliness is a disconnection from others. Being a lost soul is a disconnection from your purpose. Uncertainty is a disconnection from truth.
It's all about fragmentation.
Right, and if the stone is the stone of unity, then its function is to repair those breaks, to kind of solder the wires back together.
The one that really stood out to me, and the text really emphasizes this, is abandonment. It says the stone is especially good for dealing with feelings of abandonment. That's a very specific trauma.
It is, and abandonment is arguably the ultimate form of disconnection. It strikes right at the core of our sense of safety. The source claims the stone restores love and compassion within the being by resonating with the heart's energy center.
I find the mechanics of that interesting, and we're back to that idea of resonance. The stone is dense, stable, unchanging. If you're feeling abandoned, you feel unstable. The idea is that the stone acts as a sort of an emotional tuning fork.
That's a great analogy. If your internal frequency is chaotic because of trauma, the stone offers a base frequency of permanence. It's basically saying, I've been here for millions of years. I am not going anywhere. Tune to me.
So it counters the fear of abandonment with the reality of geologic persistence.
Precisely. It anchors you. And once you're anchored, the source suggests you can start doing some much more advanced work. This is where we leave the healing realm and get into the really trippy, multi-dimensional stuff.
Yeah, this is where the text takes a hard left turn into what feels like time travel.
It frames the stone as a doorway.
It lists 3 types of connection: ancestral, astral, and self.
Ancestral makes sense to me. Hold the rock, you think of the people who held it 5,000 years ago. That's a direct line.
But the text goes further than just memory. It implies an active link, connecting with ancestors, and then astral travel.
So for anyone listening who might not be deep into the esoteric glossary, how is the text defining astral here? Is this just dreaming?
No, in this context, astral travel usually refers to the consciousness leaving the physical body to explore non-physical planes. It's an intentional disassociation. And the source argues that because Preseli Bluestone is so grounding, so heavy and earth-connected, it acts as a safety line. You can explore the cosmos because you have this heavy anchor keeping you tethered to reality. It lets you fly because your feet are on the ground.
In a manner of speaking. But the most complex idea here is how the stone handles time. The text just completely rejects linear time.
Okay, this is the part where, I'm not gonna lie, I had to read this paragraph 3 times.
Yeah.
It uses two analogies that seem almost contradictory at first. First, it talks about the fine workings of a clock's heart.
Which implies mechanism, ticking, order.
But then it talks about a mirror to a mirror, an infinite reflection.
Think about that visual. You stand between two mirrors, you see your reflection, and the reflection of that reflection stretching out forever. An infinite tunnel.
The source calls it a continuous and infinite connection through time.
So if you combine the clock and the mirror, the clock is the rhythm, the beat of the universe. The mirror is the storage. The stone isn't just a rock, it's a recording device. It captures the reflection of the past, the present, and the future, all stacked on top of each other.
Like a hard drive with infinite capacity.
Exactly. The text says it holds an infinite number of voices, hopes, dreams, and wishes. This goes back to why the density matters. In information theory, dense structures can hold more data. The source is suggesting this dense crystalline matrix is holding the vibrational data of everything that has ever happened around it.
That is a staggering thought. It means nothing is ever lost. Every prayer said at Stonehenge, every fear felt by the person carrying that axe, it's all still in there.
It creates a version of immortality.
The stone actually speaks in the first person again in this section, and it's very poetic. I am nightfall as I am dawn. I am the old and the new. I am new birth as I am rebirth.
It's dissolving boundaries.
Right. Usually, nightfall and dawn are opposites. You can't be both.
Unless you are the cycle itself. The stone has existed through millions of nightfalls and dawns. To a rock, they aren't separate events, they're just a flickering light. It embodies the cycle. It is the old magma that cooled, and it is the new discovery by a modern seeker.
It reminds me of the geology again. Igneous rock is born from fire magma, then it cools and dies into stone. But then it's weathered, broken down, and eventually subducted back into the earth to become magma again. New birth as I am rebirth.
The science supports the mythology. The stone is a cycle of transformation, just frozen in time. And the source says, I am part of an infinite energy. I am all around and within. It's claiming omnipresence.
So, okay, let's try to synthesize this for everyone listening. We have a rock that is physically tough a survivor. We have a history of it being traded and revered all over ancient Britain. Yeah. And then we have this modern interpretation that calls it a device for healing abandonment and accessing deep time.
A lot to put on a piece of dolerite.
It is. But if you strip away all the flowery language, what is the core utility here? Why should you care about Preseli Bluestone today?
I think it comes down to the concept of the stabilizer. We live in a world of such high fragmentation. Our attention is fragmented by screens. Our communities are fragmented. Our sense of time is chopped up into notifications.
And here is a literal piece of the earth that represents the opposite of all of that.
Exactly. It represents unity, cohesion, deep time. Whether you believe in the voices or the astral travel is almost secondary. The primary function of the stone, in this view, is to remind you of durability.
It's a physical touchstone for the idea that things last.
And that you are connected to that lasting thing. If you feel lost or abandoned, the stone is tangible proof that you're part of a system that has survived for millions of years.
It's interesting you mentioned the stone as a witness to all this history. I can't stop thinking about that mirror to a mirror analogy.
It's a powerful image.
But it raises a weird question for me. We usually think of ourselves as the active ones. I pick up the rock, I look at the rock, I project my meaning onto it.
We are the observers.
Right. But if the source is correct, if this stone holds an infinite number of voices and acts as a recorder of all time,
then the dynamic flips.
does the stone observe us?
It's the logical conclusion of the text. If it contains the past, present, and future of all, then we aren't studying the stone. We are just passing phenomena that the stone is recording. We are the fleeting images in its mirror.
That makes me feel incredibly small.
But in a way, isn't that the point? To feel small is to feel connected to the whole. If the stone is watching you, you aren't alone. You aren't abandoned. You are known.
You are known by the earth itself.
Exactly.
That is a lot to process.
Yeah.
I think I need to go sit with a rock for a while and apologize for ignoring it.
Just listen. You might hear the hum.
Whether it's the hum of the universe or just the wind hitting a very dense piece of Preseli dolerite, I think it's worth a listen. That's all for this deep dive into the heart of the stone. We hope you found some connection in the history and the mystery.
Stay curious.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.